but just don't be surprised if they don't keep him on the initial 53-man roster. To that, many people will say, well, he's not going to make it to the practice squad. That's why you got to keep him. He's not going to clear waivers. Yeah, he is. Welcome into the Hot Read Podcast for Monday, August the 28th. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, Director of Published Content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We're also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network, and you can follow me on social media at Easton Freeze. I'm joined as always by producer JT, who you can follow on social media at JT_Runke. JT, how was your weekend? Happy Monday. The preseason is officially over.
It is officially over, and we are in dead week now. But also, this is going to be a very bad take, and I already know it's going to be a very bad take.
Okay.
But college football's back, man. But I just don't care about it. So many people this weekend were like, college football is back. Let's go.
At all or week zero?
No, I just don't care, man.
Bad take, not caring at all. I mean, week zero. Yeah.
I just
don't care
I don't know.
That.
The only time I care about college football is March, those 2 weeks in March, and the weeks leading up to that, where I get to just watch the games again. Just watch the games before March
prep, you mean?
In draft prep instead of watching them now. You know, might as well just
be 4 months late to all the footage. Yeah, exactly.
And then I don't have to watch the games twice.
I mean, do you, man? If the NFL is your thing, then that's your thing. It's my thing. I watch college football for good games, and when there are good games, I like it, and when they suck, I don't like it. It's pretty much that simple. Today we're going to talk about a pretty good game from the Titans on Friday, not Saturday. The Friday preseason game, the finale, in which we saw a whole lot of Malik Willis again, and it was easily his best performance of the preseason. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some final thoughts before the final 53-man roster comes out. If you're listening to this on Monday, then tomorrow, that's Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Central, is the deadline for NFL teams to have their 90-man rosters cut all the way down to 53. And that has already begun around the league, as we've seen a number of names already cut this weekend. The Titans, a handful of guys already off the roster. Nobody surprising. All guys that we were expecting to be gone, and they're starting with the easy ones, and they're going to work their way up to the more interesting battles, which we'll talk about in a moment. But all of that, and then some Titans news to cap off a pretty mundane Monday show, but it's going to be, this is the calm before the storm. Tuesday's live show will be a lot of fun. We'll be coming on live Tuesday afternoon like we typically do, recording our Wednesday show, and it'll be just in time, essentially. As soon as we know the 53-man roster, we're going to come on and talk about that and what we know, what we learned about how the Titans view themselves and how the Titans brass view their players. It's always fascinating to spend really the past month as a media group and as fans evaluating this team through our lens and trying to figure out who we would keep. And then there's always somebody that you're surprised that the team views differently than you did all along. And so we'll talk about that on Tuesday. But today, let's start with a little bit of a recap from the preseason game on Friday. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail here. It's been a whole weekend since then. I know people don't care a ton about what exactly happened, but I want to talk about a couple of the key players in that game, what they may have done for their status on this team. And the first is Malik Willis, obviously. First of all, the Titans, the game itself was kind of miserable to be at for everybody that was out in the stadium. Luckily, in the press box, we had air conditioning. But I know for a fact that when you stepped outside, it was an air fryer in Nissan Stadium. It was a disaster. It was, I think, 1 degree shy of the hottest game on record at Nissan Stadium, which I refuse to believe. The humidity was making it 10 times worse. And so miserable to just exist in the stadium. But from a fan perspective, a pretty exciting game because the Titans, as far as preseason games go, kind of walloped the Patriots. They outgained them 368 to 79 yards. The defense looked really, really good. First team defense got some run for the first time in the preseason, and they looked like a first team defense going up against a lot of backups. And you had some guys like Danico Autry absolutely murdering. I mean, just it was it's Messi in the MLS. It's LeBron in the G League. It's Patrick Mahomes in the XFL. Like that's what putting a monster like Danico Autry out there against backup offensive linemen looks like. And you got to see some of that, which was certainly fun. It was an enjoyable time. And like I mentioned before, Malik Willis put on his best show of the preseason. Now, I saw some people going as far as to say it was the best we've ever seen as Malik as a pro. I'd probably pump the brakes on that in terms of a total game. Certainly some of his best flashes as a pro, I'd agree. And maybe that second half was his best half as a pro. I'd agree there. But he did put the ball on the ground a couple of times or turn the ball over a handful of times. Finished with a stat line of, his full preseason, just so we can get the full totality out there. 485 yards through 3 games, really 2.5 when he split the first with Will Levis. 62 attempts, 3 passing touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. I believe he had roughly 100 yards rushing and another touchdown on the ground with his legs to add to that total. So 4 total touchdowns, 4 total interceptions, and nearly 500 yards passing. A good preseason, I'd say, overall, for a guy that last year a lot of people had given up on, JT. And we told people, let's pump the brakes. Let's see if he can develop. And he showed a lot of things in terms of his development this preseason that I think have some people not back in, but certainly not as out as they were. And I think that is appropriate. But it brings up the question of, Will Levis. I think a lot of people were expecting him to win that backup job by the end of August. And in the last 2 weeks, arguably the 2 most vital weeks for that competition, his injury kept him from being available. Really unfortunate. And obviously it was the best thing for him to do to not force it. I think that he definitely could have played in the last 2 games if it mattered, but because it's the preseason, it didn't. And the best thing for him and for the team was for him to rest and not push it. And so that's what they did, and they got to see a lot of Malik Willis instead. But because of that, this is a quarterback backup competition that is really left up in the air. And JT, we were talking about this in July, about how we were expecting this QB2 competition down the stretch in August to end with a whimper, to end anticlimactically, because there's not really any incentive for the team to name a backup at this point. Like, I think I have always thought, and I continue to think, it is going to be a 2A, 2B situation with Will Levis and Malik Willis up until one of them is needed in a game or somebody takes a significant leap behind the scenes in practice. But that's certainly yet to be seen. We've not seen that from either guy. And so there's no point the depth chart will come out when the 53-man roster is finalized, and maybe one will be listed above the other. If I had to guess with the Titans, they'll put Malik above Will, both in terms of his health and availability at this moment, and because they tend to defer to their veterans over the young guys, even when the young guys are arguably more talented. So I think that's what it's going to be like. Yes, maybe Malik is the 2 and Will is the 3 on the list. Functionally, I think they're a 2A, 2B. And in terms of who is the actual backup, if in week 2, God forbid, Ryan Tannehill goes down with an injury and you need somebody to come in, I think it's going to be really situational at first. I think it's going to be, Will Levis is our better option in terms of keeping the established game plan. If you'd game planned that week for a Ryan Tannehill-led offense, Will Levis is the least invasive surgery there in terms of a replacement for him. He can operate an offense much more similarly to Ryan Tannehill than Malik Willis can. Not a knock on Malik Willis, just the reality of their games. And we saw last year when Malik Willis was put into situations where they needed him to act like Ryan Tannehill, and it was, it didn't work. It's not his game. And so I don't think that's how they'll do that. But if, Ryan Tannehill gets hurt midweek and then you see a week long of prep and you need one of those guys to be the guy that week, it wouldn't shock me if, especially early on in the season, they chose Malik that week and they game planned around him and his ability and went into a game with him as the starter that week instead of Will Levis. So I think it's going to be situational. I think it's going to be 2A, 2B for the foreseeable future. And as long as Ryan Tannehill is healthy, I don't see this team, Mike Vrabel, feeling like his hand is forced in picking who is going to be that guy. 2 clips from Mike Vrabel that I want to share. The first of which is from the game itself, and this is what he had to say about Malik Willis, who started out really, really tough. I mean, he had just 22 yards passing through 1 quarter, had already turned the ball over once by that time, I think, turned the ball over again later in the game on a ball that I believe was tipped at the line of scrimmage, but he battled back, and Mike Vrabel was a big fan of that. Here's what he had to say.
Love the way that he competed. Loved it. And, got to eliminate the mistakes. I think that the one, there to Josh, I thought that the protection kind of dictated that throw and that miss. And then the other one, you just have to make a better decision. But love what he was able to do after that and just competed and finished and kept his eyes downfield and just got to take care of the football.
The second clip is from Mike Vrabel's press conference on Saturday following the game, the day after the game, that is. And he was asked about the backup quarterback position, the battle between Levis and Willis, and if there was any finality there as the preseason has come to a close, if they feel they've made a decision. And here's what he had to say.
I don't think so. I don't think, as it stands now with Will's availability, and, we'll get him back this week. But I thought that Malik took a big step yesterday. Unfortunately, you have the turnovers. But, again, there was a lot of cool stuff that happened after that. And I wouldn't say that we were great in front of them. I thought our receivers showed up and did a nice job most of the night. Malik has to make some better decisions, and then we'll see where Will's at here this week.
Going to turn our attention now to the offensive line. We saw the most first-team offensive line in this game out of all of the preseason matchups. We saw pretty much the first half. The majority of that was first-team offensive line. You did see Daniel Brunskill, starting right guard, go down with a knee injury, went into the locker room at some point, I believe, in the end of the first quarter, beginning of the second quarter. So he was the one guy missing for a lot of that run with the ones when they were still in there through 75% of that first half. He went into the locker room and was ruled questionable to return with a knee injury. So not sure what the situation is there. We'll find out more this week. Andre Dillard was the lone starter, the lone first string lineman to play all the way into the third quarter, which was strange. You had the rest of the starters sit after, I think by the midway point of the second quarter, at the very least, if my memory serves, they were all done except for Dillard. And he continued to play and play and play until halftime. And then after halftime, came back out and played another series or two, maybe just one, but at least one series in the third quarter at left tackle. Very strange. I asked Mike Vrabel about this in the press conference after the game. He gave a very short answer, a very clear answer. He said that was a head coach's decision and had nothing else to add to that. So that read to me like it was either something that, well, obviously it was something that was I don't want to talk about that. We're not talking about this answer. Maybe it was a punishment. I don't know. I'm not, that's just speculation. Perhaps it was punishment. Perhaps it was just him wanting to see more from a guy that he, wants to push to be better than he's been or more consistent than he's been. Or maybe it was simply that the player wanted to play more and he and Andre agreed for him to play more of the game. Like, I'm not sure. It's one of those things, but that's certainly something we're going to continue to monitor. Overall, the group, I think it was probably their worst showing of the preseason. Not bad, but it was the worst overall in the game from my vantage point. In the first quarter in particular, there just was no running room. They were not getting any push in the run game, and it was showing with Tyjae Spears and Julius Chestnut, who have proven themselves to be highly capable backs this preseason. Losing yardage. A lot of the time they were trying to run the ball in the first quarter, and that was discouraging. They kind of settled in a little bit, and they were gritty in the pass protection game. I think that was the better of the two halves of their game, and certainly there were some plays that they made there against a good and crafty New England defensive front. I think that was the more impressive element of their game. Certainly not great, but better than their run blocking. Mike Vrabel was asked about this on Saturday, and he had some choice words about the consistency from this offensive line group. Here's what he had to say on his offensive line.
Well, I mean, I think just that group, as a whole, we have to start better. and we need to, make sure that we're improving. And whether we game plan for what New England was in, that doesn't matter. We need to go out and play better and use our rules and block better and finish better. So I would say that entire group has to have a big week.
A couple other players before we move on to the news or to some 53-man roster talk and then the news. Two guys. One is Kearis Jackson. His preseason game in the third week probably changed my mind more than any other player on this roster as to what I feel their status is on this final 53-man roster. And it really had less to do with how he played. And he played well. I mean, he had a touchdown pass, made some plays, was utilized a lot in the receiving game. But that's what it was his utilization, how the team chose to run him out there was mainly what had me wondering if I, was wrong about him on Thursday and Friday last week when I left him out of the final 53-man roster rotation, had Reggie Roberson still in, who I think no player has taken a bigger hit besides Will Levis from Will Levis's injury absence than Reggie Roberson. A lot of his production early in camp was coming from that connection that he and Will had established. And then really Will disappeared, and so did Reggie. And so that's concerning for his ability to remain on this roster. He's been the guy that I thought was wide receiver 6 pretty much this whole time up until now. I'm now wondering if that guy's actually Kearis Jackson. And it's his special teams ability that's making me wonder that, because JT, we've talked about how this team's got to figure out their returner situation. Like, they need somebody that's not Kyle Phillips to be their kick returner, and they need somebody to be their punt returner. And they have struggled to find those guys in recent years. They ran Garrett out there to return kicks and punts pretty much all night on Friday. And they even took a timeout at one point to switch out. I think Eric Garrett was in there near the end of the game for a punt return. They took a timeout to switch him out with Kearis Jackson. Like, they wanted to see him get as much return action as possible. And he looked good. I felt like he did a pretty good job. Mike Vrabel echoed that sentiment in the press conference after the game. But if he's going to be used as a returner, that is a ticket onto this roster. Like, I don't know if you can win your job on the last week of training camp and in the last preseason game. Like, I'm not sure that there's like we said last week, I kind of get the inclination that this front office, this coaching staff has their guys set well before the last week, before the buzzer. But if it's possible to get in at the buzzer, I think Kearis may have done that. I feel like he certainly did his best at the end to state a case for himself. And so that will be fascinating. It wouldn't shock me at all at this point if he is the wide receiver 6. The other guy I want to talk about is Caleb Murphy, who is buzzing amongst the Titans faithful, especially online. And people are preemptively pissed off about him potentially not making this roster. And we've been saying it for a couple of days, couple of shows in a row now, JT. It won't shock me in the slightest if he is not on this 53-man roster, despite leading the league in the preseason this year in total sacks with 4 on Friday. He got another one. And from the average fan perspective, I 1000% understand wanting him, demanding him being on this roster. Like, I get it. But the disclaimer I have to give is don't be fooled by just preseason games, because a lot of the calculus as to who does and doesn't stay on this team is done not in front of fans, frankly, on the practice field, in front of the media, and on a lot of days where the media isn't invited to practice. Like, there's a lot that goes into this that's not just 3 60-minute games that sort of kind of matter, but not really. And so all I have to say is, and by the time you're listening to this, if it's not Monday, he may already be on the roster, and all this may be useless information. So ignore me if he makes the roster. It won't shock me either way. It won't shock me if he's on, won't shock me if he's off. But just don't be surprised if they don't keep him on the initial 53-man roster and they put him on the practice squad. And to that, many people will say, well, he's not going to make it to the practice squad. That's why you got to keep him. He's not going to clear waivers. Yeah, he is. I am very, very, very confident that they could get Caleb Murphy through waivers and onto their practice squad should they choose to do that. So that's something to keep in mind. A stat just to cap off the preseason. itself from Warren Sharp on Tyjae Spears, one of our favorite guys to watch and one of the guys that I'm most excited to cover over the coming years. He's so much fun to watch play football and a really great guy to talk to behind the scenes as well. A really great kid. He finished this preseason with 4.73 yards after contact per rush, which is number 1 out of 54 running backs with over 15 rushing attempts this preseason. 5.3 yards per carry, 9th out of 54 running backs, and plus 0.09 EPA per rush, which is 8th out of 54 qualifying running backs. But it's not just those stats that he puts up, which are great. It's the fact that he put up those stats while facing 8 or more men in the box on a staggering 41% of his rushes and 7 or more men in the box on 82% of his rushes, which are both of those numbers well above the NFL average. Very Derrick Henry-esque in that way. His ability to be a plus running back, one of the best running backs in a sample size, despite facing the most difficult wall of defenders in front of him. And so if that's any indication as to whether or not he fits on this team and fits with Derrick Henry as a compliment, I'm not sure what is. Some final thoughts from me on the final 53-man roster here before we wrap up and get to the news. There are just a couple of positions I wanted to highlight, which are the hardest, I think, to predict as we go into. And again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because within 36 hours, this will be irrelevant. We'll know who's on the team. But a couple of positions that are difficult. That inside linebacker position, the inside linebacker 5, which we've been talking about, is Monty Rice going to make this team? Is he not? I've stood firm on I think he's not going to, but it wouldn't shock me if they do keep him around. I think that is the biggest name that is on the potential chopping block right now. So is it going to be Rice at that 5th position? Is it Ben Neiman? Is it Luke Gifford, the special teams ace they got from Dallas? Chicago? Dallas. Okay.
Dallas.
From Dallas this offseason. Any of those guys could be that 5th inside linebacker. The 4th outside linebacker, the 4th edge, whether that's Sam O or like we talked about just a moment ago, Caleb Murphy, or another UDFA that they spent a lot of money on this offseason, Thomas Rush, who they've been playing more at special teams than Caleb Murphy. It could be any of those guys, and that would not shock me. Wide receiver 6, we've talked about a ton. Is that going to be Reggie Roberson? Is that going to be Keiris Jackson? Or is it going to be one of the guys that they have a reason to potentially keep around like Colton Dowell, who they spent their 7th round pick on? I think any of those 3 guys could be that person. Mason Kinsey not out of the race entirely for that spot, but if that was who they went with, I'd be kind of surprised by that. No, not kind of. I would be pretty surprised by that. So I don't think that's going to happen, but we will see. Tight end 4 or 5, still not sure how many they keep, and depending on that number, who they do keep. I'm pretty confident Sam O is on this roster, but he still can technically sit in that international spot.
You mean Thomas Odukoya?
Or sorry, what did I say?
Sam O.
Sam O, yeah. Thomas
Too
O.
long.
Thomas O, yeah,
long
not
O
Sam
names,
O.
yeah.
Thomas Odukoya, the international player who we've been really, really fond of and surprised by his development this offseason. They still can technically keep him in that international spot, JT. And as long as they're not on the 53-man roster, that's an exception. So like it's if you keep him on the 53, you don't get a 54th with him as the international player. But on the practice squad, you only get 16 guys. You can keep a 17th as that international player slot, and he can slot in there and be kept in that way. So that's the only thing that really gives me pause as to whether or not they keep him. They may feel that they can stash him in that way and find better value in that way, continuing to develop him. But at what point do you say, okay, he's developed, he's a plus player, let's put him on the roster so he can play the football games? I think we're there. I think that they think that they're there, but we're not sure for sure yet. We'll find out on Tuesday. Alize Mack still on the bubble. I think that he's a lock for them to try to put on the practice squad, but does he make the actual roster? I still want to say yes. I still want to say they keep 5 and that he's on there, but again, it won't shock me if they just keep 4. We'll have to see. And then Kevin Rader is probably the number 1 guy that will be most annoying to me if he makes this roster. I think he's still in contention because he's a guy the Titans know. He's a stalwart blocker. He's a veteran. He's a guy that they trust. Like, it'd be such a Titans move for them to keep him on this roster, and it will annoy the fool out of me if they keep him over Thomas Odukoya or Alize Mack. Both of those guys belong in over Rader, in my opinion. And then the last position, defensive line 5, the 5th defensive lineman whether that is Jaleel Johnson or Dwumfor or Jones. Any of those three guys could be in the running for that position, and that's one. If you ask which one I'm least confident about, it's probably that one. I really have no idea. Flip a coin, throw a dart. One of those three guys will get the spot, I'm pretty sure, but I don't know which one. So all of those 5 positions: tight end 4 or 5, wide receiver 6, defensive lineman 5, outside linebacker or edge 4, and inside linebacker 5 are the 5 positions I think most difficult to diagnose. And I think if you asked anybody, that would be the case. I know Mike Herndon tweeted about this earlier today as well, and he agreed those were the top 5 most difficult positions to narrow down. And so we'll have to find out on Tuesday. But that's all from me today. A lot of news to get to. So without further ado, let's get to the news with producer JT.
Yeah, let's talk about the guys who the Titans have already cut or waived earlier today as we were recording this on Sunday. So there are now, I see we have 5 listed, but 6 total here that they have cut or released, starting with offensive tackle Zach Johnson, interior offensive lineman Jimmy Murray, not to be confused with Justin Murray, still in contention here. Defensive back Alonzo Davis, wide receiver Gavin Holmes, and tight end Justin Rigg, as well as kicker Michael Badgley. Longtime Hot Read podcast legend Michael Badgley, no longer on the team. His second stay with the team, a short one, which now leaves the Titans without a kicker.
Kickerless. They are kickerless, JT, and we're going to talk a lot about some options here in a moment. Some news on some different guys they may can bring in, but not great, but also not unexpected. We were expecting as soon as they brought him in last week that he would not be long for this team, and he is in fact not long for this team.
And obviously, like, they gave him a shot, and I don't think he could have had a worse shot, like, in an actual game. I'm sorry, like,
not good.
From watching the kicks, like the one that went wide, doinked one in, one went wide left, and I mean, like, just sailed
shank left, shank.
It was not very good. Did not have a good showing whatsoever from coming into camp. So he is gone. So as we've been talking about, the kicker for the Tennessee Titans is most likely on a different team, but that doesn't mean but that doesn't mean that they're the only team out there looking for a kicker. No, they will have competition in this market, as it was reported earlier today that the 49ers rookie kicker Jake Moody, who they, by the way, spent a 3rd round pick on this past draft season.
A top 100 pick, I believe.
Yes. He has a right quad injury, and then veteran Zane Gonzalez is also expected to miss a few weeks with a calf strain. So they are also kickerless and will be in the market for one to get them by as they recover from injury.
Well, and maybe get them by, maybe to start, because I don't know if you paid any attention to Jake Moody in the preseason before he got hurt. I think him getting hurt
look great.
Kind of merciful that he got hurt, frankly, because it was going really, really poorly for the top drafted kicker, a top 100 3rd round pick kicker, which was crazy at the time, and now looks even more insane over there in San Francisco.
Yeah, so as we alluded to, the kicker might be on somebody else's team currently, and there are 3. We'll talk about 3 guys here that are 3 kicker battles, I should say, and then 2 other guys that we can talk about. But let's start with the kicker battles ongoing. First with the Los Angeles Chargers. Currently, Cameron Dicker and Dustin Hopkins are on the Los Angeles Chargers right now, battling it out. So last season for Cameron Dicker, and I believe this goes by field goals made and then
field goals and extra points.
So Cameron Dicker was 21 of 22 last season in field goals and 24 of 24 for his extra points. This preseason was 4 for 4 and 5 for 5 respectively. And
easily the best kicker on this list, by the way, of the 6 guys we're about to talk about. He's the best kicker and the one that I'd be floored if he's available. I'll be shocked if he's not kept by the Chargers because he's very good.
And then Dustin Hopkins last season, 9 of 10 from field goals and 12 of 12 on extra points. This preseason, he was 2 of 2 for field goals and 3 of 3 for extra points. So
also a good option.
Pretty good option there. Yep. And then also in New England, a team that was just here has a kicker battle ongoing. Nick Folk versus Ryland. I forget what his first name is.
I'll find it, but you can talk about the stats.
Nick Folk here season. Chad Ryland. Nick Folk went 32 of 37 last season for field goals, and then 32 of 35 for extra points, including in the preseason, 1 field goal made out of 1 attempt, and then 2 extra points made on 2
Patriots
attempts.
have not done much scoring this preseason, so unfortunately, not a lot of recent data on their guys.
And then Chad Ryland, who was a 4th round rookie drafted this season, is 2 of 2 for extra points. So could be an interesting acquisition there, but also kind of unproven in that New England.
But again, a 4th round draft pick, also very highly drafted, great college pedigree. And from what we hear at camp, it's been very heated. And he's a guy that in camp has been making everything. So definitely an option if they end. I'm guessing they're leaning towards Ryland being the one cut because Folk is a more known commodity. But keep an eye on Chad Ryland for sure.
Definitely interested though to spend such a high capital on him with a 4th round pick, right?
When you have a guy in Nick Folk too, yeah, that's
interesting. But and then the New Orleans kicker competition here, who they will face
Group and Will Lutz.
Yes, they will face. Maybe one of the kickers finds their way to Tennessee and the other one's on New Orleans, and they meet
playing in week 1 in New Orleans, one way or another.
Right. Of course, Blake Group is a 2023 undrafted free agent who has gone 3 for 3 from field goals this preseason and then made 1 extra point on 1 attempt. And of course, Will Lutz, a kind of more known commodity, although had a pretty rough season last year.
Yeah.
He had a pretty rough season, going 23 of 31 for field goals last season, but making all of his 33 extra point attempts. This preseason, he's gone 4 for 4 on field goals and 2 for 2 of extra points. So out of those 6 guys,
by the way, on Lutz, sorry, just to cut you off real quick. I want to say last year, yes, he didn't have a good year, but if my memory is not just making things up at this point, I feel like they had him try a number of like bonkers long kicks that never had a chance. And so that kind of hurt his average, but yeah.
Considering Andy Dalton was playing for most of the season, like
they probably had a couple of long attempts. Yeah.
Probably like 64, 65 yarders, like way back.
I'm positive
like,
there was
the
at
game
least
or something.
It was like 66 and I turned my television onto it and was like, what are we doing out here? What, huh? Excuse me?
But like you said, probably Cameron Dicker is the top guy on that list, but out of the other guys, what is your next best option out of those?
I find Hopkins fascinating. The guy that I think is going to lose to Dicker up there in LA. I think that Hopkins and Ryland are the 2 most likely to be available in the coming days. Ryland losing out to Nick Folk in New England and Hopkins losing out to Cameron Dicker in LA. I think they are both certainly worth, like, they're both better than what you got, which is nothing. So bring them both in, see what happens. You got to get somebody in here and quickly. I think Hopkins is my first choice just because we've seen he played last season, 9 of 10 from range last year. This preseason, he's been perfect on 5 kicks. So certainly more on paper to show us than Ryland has shown us. But I expect if he's available to probably have some, like you mentioned at the top, some real competition for these guys from other teams around the league that need a kicker.
And then finally, 2, I should say, very much older veterans that are still on the market.
Total different end of the spectrum here. Will Lutz, end of the spectrum. Yeah.
Yes, Will Lutz towards the end. Mason Crosby, who kind of put out a Titans fan thirst trap today of sorts.
Did put out a Titans fan thirst trap.
In which he was in Nashville saying, "Hey guys, I'm ready to kick again," and
not just in Nashville,
showing off his kicking abilities.
Showing off the kicking abilities at the Brentwood High School football field, my alma mater. God bless and go Bruins. Good to see him. I know that he lives around here. He lives in Brentwood, and he's continuing to stay in shape. I know on that video he nails a 60-yarder. So worth, kick the tires, see what happens. If none of these young guys are of your liking, Titans front office, but I think that he is, of these 2 veterans, he's the one worth kicking the tires on. This next guy, I'm gonna really caution folks to continue to call his name.
And a lot of people have called his name today, and that is longtime veteran Robbie Gould, who is another option still out there.
And people are making this, I think this is lazy on a lot of people's part because the connection is, Ran Carthon came from San Francisco. Robbie Gould, longtime San Francisco 49er legend kicker. There's a connection there. Bring him in. That is the very reason why you should at this point be out on him, in my opinion. He's been available this whole time. Back when Ran first got hired, he was available. Do you not think Robbie Gould is a guy that Ran Carthon has passed on already because he was in San Francisco. He knows what Robbie Gould is right now and knows that's not it. Like the same reason that, as Diana Rossini reported a couple of days ago, Ran Carthon and the Titans straight up passed on a potential trade discussion with Trey Lance early on in the offseason because, again, Ran knew what was up, knew what they had in Lance, and just said, "I'm good." I think the same thing has probably happened with Robbie Gould already. Like, I think by now that connection would have been used if there was something there, and I think that Ran probably knows there's nothing there. He's done. It's over. And so I think that folks need to quit calling that comparison or that connection out, because I think that the writing's on the wall. If you read the tea leaves on that one, it's not a great situation, I don't think.
Yeah, and that's going to do it for our news today.
All right, that is JT with the news. Thank you, JT. And that is it for us today. A shorter episode, but saving some energy, saving some time in your feed for you to make sure you can listen to our big boy episode on Tuesday when we're talking about the Titans roster cut down, as well as any other news that happens to come across the timeline. I'll be back at practice on Monday and Tuesday. No, we're off Tuesday. So back on Monday, we'll get to talk to some guys in the locker room. Last chance to talk to a lot of these guys before a number of them are unfortunately cut. Just a PSA to folks. This is the next thing. You've probably seen this from other people in the league, but it's important to note the next 2-ish days in the NFL is the most difficult for most of the players and the GMs and the coaches. Every roster has to cut 37 guys by Tuesday afternoon, which means something like 1,200 players around the league are going to be without a job. Now, about 500 of them will be signed back to practice squads, which is the good news. But for the other 500 or 600 guys, it's going to be a massive setback in their dream, in their career. And so don't be a dick, don't tag athletes that got cut on social media or stomp on their grave, or, it's a tough time. These are people. They're not you got to remember, they're not just athletes. They're not just widgets on your screen. They're not Madden characters. They're real people. So be kind as people are, losing a lot of their jobs in the coming days. But that somber note aside, we are excited to find out who the final 53-man roster is, and we can finally talk about the real team that is the Tennessee Titans in 2023. Until then, just a couple of things. Our fantasy league, JT, locked and loaded. More interest than we thought. We thought we were going to do a 10-man league. We're doing a 14-man league because we had 12 buddies say, let's do it. Those of you that are joining us, looking forward to drafting sometime this week. We'll get in contact with you guys behind the scenes. Make sure to check your DMs, or however you contacted us, we'll contact you back that same way through that same channel to talk about getting maybe a group chat set up, getting our league set up, and drafting at some point this week. Looking forward to that. Make sure to follow us on social media at Hot Read Pod on Instagram, on TikTok, on Twitter. That's where you're going to find us, all of our content from the show, clips, as well as information on when we're going live. If you want to join the conversation and be a part of that during the week, make sure you are checking out Zen Sportsbook, which is the newest sports betting option here in the state of Tennessee. We are partnered with them. Our promo code is HOTPOD. Special sign-up bonus when you sign up with sign-up code HOTPOD, HOTPOD. 5% cash back bonus on all of your betting volume in your first 15 days. And then after that 15-day welcome bonus period, 3% cash back on all of your betting volume forever. That's 3% cash back on your wins, on your losses. It's all cash back in your pocket. That's a thank you from Zen Sportsbook for giving them a try. And we are really fond of the people over there and their app, their product. So give it a try. Zen Sportsbook. Do your betting in the NFL this season with Zen Sports. All right, JT, that's it for us today. For producer JT, I'm your host, Easton Freeze. We'll be back Tuesday afternoon recording our Wednesday morning show. Until then, this has been the Hot Read Podcast. We'll talk to you on Tuesday.